So this is what we want to build. We want to design this. This is what we want to design. But before we design it, there are some things we are going to talk about. There are some fundamentals that we need to talk about. The first fundamentals we talk about is that in HTML, element can be nested inside each other. That means you can put some elements inside another element. So if you look at this anchor A element, you will see that all of them are inside the div element. This div element. So this div element is the parent. The div element is the parent, while these A elements are the children div. So you can put elements inside each other. That's number one. So you look at the example that I provided here. So let's run this example. You will see that here you have two divs. This circle and the other circle are children divs of this parent div. The square is the parent div. The two circles are the children div. So this case is the parent div. So that's how it is in the code. If you look at the code, you are going to see that we have a parent div. Now inside that parent div, we have two divs as children divs now. You have a div class equal to child div, another div class equal to child div. Both of them are inside this parent div. So elements can be nested inside each other. That's one. The other thing we are going to talk about is what is called CSS positioning. So and we talk about the fixed and the absolute position. Fixed and absolute position. Actually, we have in CSS when you specify CSS position, something like this position, it can be you can put fixed, it can be fixed, the value can be fixed, the value can be absolute, the value can be relative, and the value can be static. So, but the values we are going to discuss now is the fixed and absolute value. So now let's do it now. So now if this my first child div, this first child div, I might add another class to it which is fixed. Now I believe you know that you can add many classes to a paid to an element. So you can add two classes to an element, three classes, four classes, five classes. You can add many classes to an element. What you just need is to separate each class name with a space. So if I want to add another class, I'll just a space and the name of the class. If I want to add class number 4, a place, a space, and the name of the class. So I'm adding another class to this first child div, and the class I'm adding is fixed. So let's look at how position fixed, what it does in CSS. So position fixed. Yes. So you see that the position the sorry, I'm coming. Let me remove this right. This is before positioning, right? In short, let's have two this. Let's show one before positioning and one after position. After position, Control C, Control V. After position. So here in the first place, I will not put fixed class there. I won't put fixed class there. But I put fixed class in the second one. So let's go and style that class that's put here. So you know how to style class. You put dot fixed. That's to say that we are targeting the class of fixed. Then the two curly braces, then the property position and the value fixed. So if you go to the browser and check what, let's look at what it's going to be like. So you can see that before I apply fixed position for this first element, they are arranged according to their position in the code. So this is the first div, this is the first child div in the code, and this is the second child div in the code, and that's the way they are arranged in our browser now. But after I've decided to give this first element the fixed positioning, this second element that is underneath decide to come up. So the first element now comes up. So what happened? Now, so what happened in fixed positioning is that whenever you specify an element to be position fixed, the element is going to be removed from the normal order that it is in the code. So now in this code, this first child div is the number one div. This is the number two div inside this parent div. But once I give this first div fixed position, it's like it will be as if it has been removed from that parent div. And so what happens is that this div comes up. So that's the first thing you need to know. Whenever you give an element fixed positioning, it's usually is like that element has been removed from the normal position it occupies before. So it is no longer going to follow the positioning as it is in the code. No, you have removed it from the flow of the code. That's one. Now, if you now leave it as position fixed, you won't see much effect. That's the only thing you see, this overlapping. Overlapping will occur. Do you understand? So the second div will not see any, it will be as if the second div doesn't know that there's a div upward. So to the second div, this place is empty. So it's going to come up to come and occupy that space. So that's what you are going to see when you specify position fixed. But when it becomes interesting, what is going to become interesting when you start applying some other CSS property. Now, after you have applied position fixed, you can apply other CSS property to position your element. So you can do top 20 pixels, and it means your element should be from the top. It should be 20 pixels from the top. You can let's look at it in the code. Oh, Z. I'm coming. Let me do it for the this. Let me add the same div so that you know. No. So let me remove this first one that we were using as check before. So I've removed this first one. Now position fixed, top 20 pixels. Or let's do it right so that it's going to be clear what I want to explain. Right 20 pixels. So this is what happened. So this element that I've given position fixed is now becoming interesting. Now it's no more inside its parent div. This first child div now, you can't find it inside this square, which is the parent div. Now, because I've specified that it should be from the right, it should be 20 pixels. From the right of this document, it should be 20 pixels. So what you notice is that once an element is being given position of fixed, it is now going to be positioned according to the document, according to the HTML body, HTML document, this browser window that you are seeing. It's not going to be positioned according to its parents. You know, relatively, when I'm giving it right 20 pixels, it should be 20 pixels from its parent element. But no, it's going to be 20 pixels from the browser window, from the document, 20 pixels from the right of the document. So, and a fixed element is going to behave relatively to the document, not relatively to its parent element. So, if I give it bottom, if it is bottom 20 pixels, you see that it's going to go down. it's still not inside this parent element, because since I given it a fixed position, it's not going to be it's not going to be positioned relatively to this parent element. It's going to be positioned relatively to the whole document. So that's another thing you need to know about position fixed. And that's not the end. Another thing you need to know is that whenever you give it position fixed, the element stays there regardless of how many times you are scrolling, regardless of maybe you scrolled or not. What am I saying? Let's assume this parent element, this parent div, let's give it a very large width. Let's increase the width, or its height. Let's increase its height. Let's say its height is going to be something like 1,500 pixels. So let's do it this way first. Now you notice that the height of this parent div is now very long. So you have to scroll down. But no matter your scrolling, the fixed element stays where it is. It doesn't move. That's really the meaning of being fixed. It stays there. You can see. Even though this second element that you are seeing now starts, it moves according to our scroll. But this other one just stay there. Stay. So that's another thing about fixed position. The element does not scroll. It stays there permanently. And so that's why when we have our header here and we start to scroll, you will discover that the header just stay there at the top. It does not move. It's there at the top. So that's fixed position. Okay, so let's get this one back to its original height. Let's get the parent element back to its original height. So the parent element is in its original height. Now let's talk about position absolute. Now we've talked about position fixed and you know what it does. It fixes element on a particular place in the document body, and the element does not scroll. Now aside from that, you can use top, bottom, right, left to position the element relatively to the document body. Now also the element is removed from the normal position it occupies in code. It's now going to be behaving according to the document body, not according to any element. It will be as if it's not there. The position which it occupies initially, it will be as if it's not there. So if there's another element at the bottom, that element will try to occupy its space. And so that's all we discussed about position fixed. Now let's discuss position absolute now. What about absolute? There are some differences. First of all, absolute. Now, first of all, if I'm going to, let's get back the height, that very long height. Now this height, if I'm given fixed position, let's change it to absolute, and now let's give it position absolute here. So I've changed the class. The class is now absolute class. So I'm going to change the class here to absolute. Let's save. So I'm now giving it position of absolute instead of position of fixed. So let's save and now let's start scrolling. You discover now that in this case, the absolute element scrolls. So while the fixed element do not scroll, the absolute element actually scrolls. So when you give an element position absolute in CSS, it scrolls, and that's different from fixed position. That's one. Another one is that whenever you give an element position of absolute, it's going to behave either relatively to its parent element or relatively to the document body. What am I saying? Let's see now. This parent diff, I'm going to do something to this parent diff. I'm going to come here and say position. I'm going to give the parent diff a position. Let's just give relative. Don't worry about that. Don't worry. And let's increase its height to 600 pixels. Now, let's leave it down. So let's see what happens. So you can see this parent element is the one I have given height of 600 pixels, and this is the absolute element, absolute positioned element. Now I said bottom 20 pixels for this absolute element, and you see that it means from the bottom of its parent element, it calculates 20 pixels and stays there, right? Now let me now go and remove this position relative that I've given to the parent. Let me remove it. So the parent does not have any positioning now. Only this one has its own position as position absolute. The parent do not have any position now. So let's remove it. Now you can see it moves downward. Huh? So as to make it clear, let me just reduce the height to 400 pixels. So you see, now it's not even inside this parent element again, like the behavior of the fixed element, right? The other time when we said position of fixed, we see clearly that the fixed element was not inside its parent element when we use top, right, bottom, left to position it. So the same thing is happening to absolute element now. But watch again. If I go back to the parent element and I give it position of relative, which I removed the other time, what will happen? Now it's back in its parent element. It's now back in its parent element. It's now calculating 20 pixels of its parent element. But the other time it was calculating 20 pixels of the document body when there was no position relative in its parent element. Now I've removed positioning from its parent element. If you go back and refresh, you will see now that it's calculating 20 pixels from the document body, not its parent element. So whenever you give an element position of absolute, it's going to behave in two ways, either two ways, one or the other. If its parent has a positioning style, whichever positioning style, whether position relative or position fixed or position absolute, so far its parent just have a positioning style, the absolute element will position itself relatively to its parent element, and that was what was happening when I gave this parent element a position style. Let's go back. So if I'm giving it a position style, whatever the position style, even if it is static, whatever the position style I'm giving it now, so far the parent element now has a position style. What happens? This div will position itself relatively to the parent. Yes. Behave relatively to the parent. Let's give the parent a fixed position. I'm giving the parent a fixed position now. Do the same thing. So when the parent element has a positioning style, either relative or absolute or fixed, so far the parent has any positioning style, the child element that is given an absolute position will position itself relatively to the parent element. So when you give it bottom of 20 pixels, it's going to calculate the bottom of its parent element. But when there is no positioning style in the parent element, the absolute element, the child that has the absolute position, will position itself relatively to the document body. So when you give it the bottom of 20 pixels, it's going to go and calculate the 20 pixels from the bottom of the document body, not of the class, not of the parent element rather. Do you understand? So That's another way by which absolute position behaves. So another thing that you need to know is that whether an element has position of absolute, or it has it has a position of fixed. Whether it's absolute or fixed, one thing is sure: most of the time, another element will meet them where they are. The position which they occupied before, since they are now being removed from that position, another element will go there and it will meet them there. And so that was what happened when initially, when I didn't specify bottom 20 pixels or something. Let's just see it. So here now, if I'm saying this should be top 20 pixels, so you see that that's another element has positioned itself where this absolute positioned element is going to be. This absolute positioned element where it is now, another element has positioned itself there, because that other element, it's like there is no element there before for the other element. So it doesn't see any element there, so it's positioned itself there. So something like this will occur: two elements overlapping each other. um Two elements overlapping each other. Now, what we are going to use to resolve this issue is what is called Z index. That's another CSS property, Z index. So it's Z index that is going to specify which of the overlapping elements will be on the top, which of the overlapping elements will be under. So whenever you do Z index, you have to give both elements that are conflicting. You have to give both of them Z index. So if I give this one 100, by the way, Z index does not have any unit, it's just a number. Otherwise, I save and I take it out here. Nothing happens. So there are also some rules for Z index. For Z index to occur, there are some rules that you have to follow. First of all, you are specifying Z index because two elements are overlapping, right? So for the two elements that is overlapping now, you must give those two elements must have a positioning style in CSS, whichever positioning style it is. So like this one now, this second div, let's just give it an inline styling. I want to give it inline styling. Let's just give it position of relative, such so that it's it too it's going to have a positioning style. So now it is going to have a positioning style. So that's the first rule. The two elements are overlapping and you want to resolve. You want to specify which one will be on top, which one will be under. Those two elements must have a positioning style in CSS. That's the first rule. The second rule is that both of them must have Z index. So you must put Z index for the style of both elements. Both elements must have Z index property in their CSS. Now, the one that has the highest Z index will be the one that will be on top. So let me specify Z index for this one too. And let's say 1000. You know 1000 is greater than 100 here. So let's refresh. In order for you to see it very well, let me add background to both of them. Let me add background to both of them. Background color. Let's add white so that you see the effect. But for this one that I've given the position of absolute, let me change its border. Let's border to 2 pixels solid blue. Yes. So you can see now that it is this one, the absolute position element, that is underneath now when they overlap. When these two elements overlap, the one that has given absolute position element is the one that is underneath now. Why? Because It is this one that has the highest Z index. This one without an absolute position is the one that has the highest Z index. So it will be the one on top. What about if I change this one Z index to 10? If I change it to 10 now, then that means this one will be the one below. This first, this second element. Let me just specify second element. Yes. So you can see now, the second element is the one coming below now. So you can use Z index to specify the order in which your element appear, which one is going to be on top, which one is going to be under. And this happens whenever you've given an element an absolute position in CSS or a fixed position in CSS. What happens most of the time is that it's going to meet an element where it's going to position itself, or another element where it's going to meet it there where it's going to position itself. So Z index will enable you to resolve this conflict. You understand? And that's why you see that in this code that this one that we are going to do now, you see that as I scroll, this div contains the rest of the page that you see. We scroll underneath this header. It's going to scroll underneath this header. So it means this header has a higher Z index than the rest of this page of the page. So whenever you scroll, it scrolls underneath, not on top. So let's check out this. Let's just check out this. So let's say I'm giving this one Z index of minus 10. Let me give it Z index of minus 10 now, and you see what we have. So you see now it scrolls on top of the header, not underneath the header. Because the header now has a negative Z index, which simply means that it's now the one underneath. Do you understand? So that's about that. Position absolute and position fixed in CSS.